Hi guys, my name is Dee Baker from Elements of Empowerment. You can find out more about my work at elementsofempowerment.com. And today's video is all about boundaries, to find out what are boundaries, what different types exist, and how to set them. Okay, so let's start. So the simplest definition for what are boundaries is that boundaries are a life-enhancing system of yeses and nos. And this simply means that we know clearly what our yeses and nos are in terms of our friendships, our romantic relationships, our family dynamics, our work expectations. And so the most important thing is to set boundaries to be healthy. So when we talk about empowerment, creating healthy boundaries is the most empowering thing you can do. So by doing so, you protect your self-esteem and you can enjoy healthy relationships in all aspects of your life. So unhealthy boundaries can lead to anxiety and even stress-induced physical illness. So it's a really important aspect of our life to manage. There are different types of boundaries that we have in our lives. And the first one is rigid boundaries. So what are rigid boundaries? Rigid boundaries are what they sound like. They are yielding, unyielding, and they are absolute. So, for example, if you never go to lunch with your colleagues in work because you think it is a waste of time or money, that could be considered a rigid boundary. It's an all or nothing experience. So, when you have rigid boundaries in your life, what you may do is avoid intimacy or close relationships. There's also a fierce independence involved where you may be unlikely to ask for help. You may have few close relationships, even in terms of friendships, and you can seem detached even with romantic partners. This just serves to keep others at a distance. And the most important thing that you're trying to do is to avoid the possibility of rejection, which in life is pretty much impossible. We cannot control or predict how other people will act. And so there are costs involved with having rigid boundaries. And these do come at a high cost. You may feel protected in some elements. However, they can create a lot of distance between you and the people in your life. And this can potentially isolate you and harm the relationships that you already have. So you may have a fear of vulnerability or a history of relationships in which you were taken advantage of. And that's why you may be likely to have adopted rigid boundaries. So, as we will see, we all have different aspects to these boundaries in our lives at different times. And so, if you have come through maybe a particularly traumatic relationship, then in your next romantic relationship, the possibility of seeing rigid boundaries in order to protect yourself is very real. So, the opposite of rigid boundaries is porous boundaries. And this is, you may have experienced these in the past, which is why you have now got rigid boundaries. And so, porous boundaries, like the name suggests, they are weak and easily breached. And people who are afraid of rejection or are emotionally enmeshed with others are more likely to have porous boundaries. So, that can look like the other person's needs, wants, expectations come before your own. So, porous boundaries, what it can look like in relationships or just in your life in general, may be that you overshare personal information. And this may be in a setting that's not appropriate. It might be in work, it might be with someone you just met. Um, the other thing that you could see in your life is that you have difficulty saying no to the requests of others. And again, this comes back to putting other people before ourselves. Also, it may look like becoming over involved in others' problems. to the point that you take those problems on as your own. You may be highly dependent on the opinion of others in terms of your self esteem or the decisions you make in life, and you may be accepting of abuse or disrespect. There may also be a deep fear of rejection from others if you don't comply to their wants and to their needs. So, as we can clearly see, porous boundaries don't serve to help us in our lives. They don't serve to help us have healthy relationships with others and especially with ourselves, because we are valuing others, we are placing them ahead of ourselves. So, ideally, what we really want, all of us in our lives, is healthy boundaries. And so, healthy boundaries are limits that you create between yourself and other people. And it's really looking at what is acceptable for you and healthy for you in your relationships. And so, boundaries can protect us both physically and psychologically, where we have our clearly defined system of yeses and nos. We know where we're comfortable with someone in our personal space. We know how comfortable we are in getting enmeshed in relationships. And everyone has different values and needs and sensitivities. So the process of defining personal boundaries varies. And this is where it's really important to know yourself, to know your values. That's one of the easiest ways to clearly define what boundaries you need in your life, is to know what you value, and perhaps to just establish relationships with people who share those values or who understand and respect them, even if they don't share them. And your boundaries will change over the course of your life. So, obviously, when we're teenagers and all we want is that peer recognition and support, it's very important. Then our boundaries may not be clearly defined, and even in terms of self knowledge, we may not even know what our values truly are. So, what do healthy boundaries look like? Number one is that you value your own opinions. And especially in the world today where opinions are so divided, there is a very clear divide on what people value. I think it's really important to value your own opinions while respecting the opinions of others. And as we have just talked about values, the biggest thing for to establish healthy boundaries and to have them in your life is that you don't compromise your values for other people. And like we said, with porous boundaries where there's oversharing of personal information, with healthy boundaries, we share personal information in an appropriate way and that we don't over or undershare. A huge one is to know our personal wants and needs and we can communicate them. And this is what I think most people struggle with, is identifying their own personal needs and wants, especially if they have been in maybe traumatic relationships or relationships where they've been taken advantage of. And a huge part of healthy boundaries for ourselves personally is also respecting other people and accepting their no's when they're given and respecting their reasons why they have them. So, as you can see, in terms of boundary setting, what it involves, what it examines, it's a very mixed bag. And for most of us, we have mixed boundary types. So, it might be very easy for you to keep healthy boundaries within a work situation where there's a very clearly defined role within work. And there are policies and procedures around how you act. However, you may have quite porous boundaries within your family life or possibly your romantic relationships. So usually in life we have a mix of all three. And so the key areas to protect using boundaries for all of us is our time, our energy, and our emotions. And these are the true values of life. So if someone is encroaching on your time, is expecting more energy from you, or is even expecting you to emotionally carry the bulk of a relationship, be it romantic or a friendship, it's not good. So we've got a short video today, um, and that is just giving you the basics around boundary setting and to help you become more informed. But the easiest and the shortest route to better boundaries is to really like yourself, or better yet, really love yourself. And so I would encourage you to find out more, to identify your own values, and to really reflect and focus on what are your important yeses and nos in life. This is all for today on boundaries and boundary setting. If you'd like to know more about my work, go to www.elementsofempowerment.com. Thanks, guys, and hope you have a great week ahead. Bye.